The back door slammed shut behind me, my boots still dusted with sawdust from the workshop, when Lauren hit me with it. "Ryan, I'm moving out for a bit. I want to live with someone else, just a break from us." Her voice was light, like she was asking me to pass the salt. I stood there, hands shoved in my pockets, the faint smell of cedar clinging to my shirt from the bench I'd been shaping all day. 10 years of marriage, and she drops this on a random Thursday? I should have yelled, maybe thrown something. Instead, I smiled. "Okay," I said, nodding slowly. "Take all the time you need." She blinked, surprised, then grabbed her keys and walked out. But that smile wasn't agreement. It was the first spark of something darker. I'd spent a decade building a life with her, fixing leaky faucets, planting her stupid rose bushes while she planned this. My chest tightened as I replayed her words. Someone else. Not a vague, I need space, but a person. I crossed the living room, still hearing her car peel out of the driveway, and stopped at the window. The backyard stretched out under the dusk, quiet except for the wind rattling the old patio chair she loved. I dragged it to the center of the lawn, grabbed a lighter from the kitchen, and flicked it on. The flame caught the frayed cushion, a slow orange glow creeping up the wood. I wasn't thinking straight, yet I was. This wasn't just trash burning. It was the start of something I couldn't stop. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the grass, and I watched, hands clenched. "She'd be back tomorrow for more stuff," she'd said. "Fine, let her come." But then I heard it, a rustling from the fence line. My head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Someone was out there, watching me torch her precious chair. The glow lit up a familiar face. Tom, the neighbor who never minded his own business. He leaned over, squinting. "Everything okay, Ryan?" he called. I forced a grin, but my mind was already racing. "Spring cleaning," I shouted back at Tom, kicking dirt over a stray ember. "Getting rid of junk." He nodded, unconvinced, but shuffled back to his house, leaving me alone with the fire. The chair was a skeleton now, blackened and crumbling, and I felt a strange calm settle in. Lauren thought I'd just roll over, didn't she? I'd always been the steady one, paying bills, carving little shell for her trinkets while she laughed it off as cute. But that smile I gave her wasn't surrender. It was me realizing I'd been blind too long. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, cracked it open, and sat on the porch steps, watching the flames die down. 10 years ago, she'd been the one chasing me, late-night diner dates, her giggling at my bad jokes. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped asking questions. Her weekend girls' trips, the late nights at work, I trusted her. But now, someone else wasn't a vague idea. It was a face I didn't know yet. Therefore, I needed to make her feel this, not just hear it. I finished the beer, crushed the can, and headed inside. Her closet was still half full, dresses she'd spent my money on, shoes she'd worn once. I started pulling them out one by one, piling them by the back door. The fire pit was still warm when I hauled the heap outside. Silk and cotton hit the coals, flaring up fast. I tossed in a pair of heels she'd bragged about, watching the soles melt. It felt good, better than it should have. But then Tom's voice echoed in my head. He'd said something odd before he left. Saw Lauren earlier with some guy. Looked cozy. My hands froze mid-toss, a charred scarf dangling from my fingers. A guy? Already? I'd assumed she'd at least wait a day before parading whoever this was. The fire roared, but my mind was louder. I needed to know who. I stomped back inside, grabbed my keys, and paused. Her phone had pinged earlier. She'd left it charging on the counter. I stared at it, the screen dark, tempting me. One swipe could tell me everything. I didn't touch her phone. Not yet. My hands were shaking too much, and I wasn't ready to see a name that'd make this real. Instead, I stormed back outside, the fire still licking at Lauren's things. The backyard smelled like burnt perfume and regret. I grabbed a rake, stirred the ashes, and watched sparks spiral into the night. She'd walked out like it was nothing, like I was nothing. But this fire? This was something. I dragged more out. Photo albums from our early years, her college sweatshirt she still wore to bed. Each piece fueled the blaze, and I fueled my resolve. I'd built this house with her in mind. Every corner, every shelf. The workshop out back was my space, sure, but even it had her fingerprints. The cedar box I'd made for her jewelry, The table she'd called rustic with a smirk. That was all kindling. But then I tripped over something heavy in the grass, a small metal box locked tight, half buried under a pile of her junk. I knelt, brushing off dirt. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. My pulse quickened as I carried it to the porch light. Scratches marred the lid, and a tiny padlock gleamed. What was she hiding? I grabbed a chisel from a workshop, wedged it under the lock, and popped it open with a crack. Inside, a stack of letters, a man's watch, too flashy for my taste, and a Polaroid of Lauren laughing with someone I couldn't see, the edge torn off. The letters were handwritten, signed with a looping C. One line jumped out. "Can't wait till it's just us." My stomach lurched. This wasn't new. This wasn't a break. I shoved the box aside, chest heaving, and marched back to the fire. The watch hit the flames first, glass cracking in the heat. But then my phone buzzed. Lauren. "Hey, I'll swing by tomorrow for more stuff. You okay?" Her voice was too sweet, too fake. I stared at the fire, the letters still clutched in my hand. "Yeah," I said, voice steady. "Just keeping warm." She hung up, oblivious to the storm she'd lit. The fire was a dull glow now, but the letters in my hand burned hotter. I sank onto the porch steps, rereading that line. "Can't wait till it's just us." See, it wasn't a fling. This was someone she'd known long enough to write to keep secrets with. I'd been sanding wood and mowing lawns while she built this double life. My jaw tightened as I stuffed the letters into my pocket. Tom's words gnawed at me. Saw Lauren earlier with some guy. I glanced at his house, lights off now. He'd always been a busybody, grilling me about my projects, eyeing Lauren's car whenever she left. Maybe he'd seen more than he let on. I crossed the yard, boots crunching on ash, and banged on his door. He opened it, bleary-eyed, in a stained robe. "Ryan? It's late." I didn't apologize. That guy with Lauren. Who was he? Tom scratched his beard, hesitating. Tall, leather jacket, rode a motorcycle. They were laughing by her car this afternoon. A motorcycle. My mind flashed to the rumble I'd heard when she drove off. But then he added, "Looked familiar. Maybe from that bar on Route 12. Route 12, the dive she dragged me to once, years ago, then claimed she hated." I thanked him, voice flat, and turned back to the yard. The fire was out, but my head was spinning. A motorcycle guy from a bar she hated? I kicked the rake aside, grabbed my truck keys, and slid into the driver's seat. She'd given me an address, some apartment she'd crash at 20 miles out. I didn't plan to knock, just watch. The drive was quiet, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. When I pulled up, her sedan was parked beside a beat-up Harley. My throat tightened. I killed the engine, slouched low, and waited. 10 minutes later, she stepped out, hair messy, arm linked with a guy in a leather jacket. He lit a cigarette, grinning at her like they'd won something. My fingers dug into the seat. This wasn't a break, it was her endgame. But then my phone lit up again, her name on the screen, calling me from right there. I let the call ring out, watching Lauren fumble with her phone 50 yards away, oblivious I was parked in the shadows. The guy, tall, broad, leather creaking as he moved, leaned in, whispering something that made her laugh. My laugh once. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, then peeled out of there before she could spot me. The truck's engine roared, drowning out the chaos in my head. Back home, I didn't go inside too many ghosts. Instead, I beelined for the workshop, my sanctuary. The air smelled of pine and oil, tools lined up like soldiers. I grabbed a half-finished table, ran my hand over its rough edge, and started sanding. The rhythm steadied me, back and forth, dust swirling under the bulb overhead. I'd built this piece for us, picturing dinners, holidays. She called it clunky, rolled her eyes. Now it was mine, but the calm didn't last. My phone buzzed again, another text, coming by tomorrow. "Don't be weird about this, okay?" Weird? I laughed, sharp and bitter, tossing the phone onto the workbench. She thought I'd just hand over her life like a doormat. I sanded harder, wood groaning under my hands, until I pictured that motorcycle guy's smirk. The letters. The watch. See. I stopped, chest heaving, and glanced at the fire pit through the window. Embers still glowed faintly, a reminder of what I'd started. I'd burned her things to feel something, control, Maybe, but it wasn't enough. I needed to know how deep this went. I grabbed a hammer, not to build, but to break, and headed back to the yard. That locked box, she'd left it behind, assuming I'd never find it. I smashed the chisel deeper, tearing out the last scraps. A receipt from that bar on Route 12, dated 2 months ago. 2 drinks, 2 names, hers and a Chris. My gut twisted. Chris. See, but then I heard tires on gravel, her car pulling in fast. Headlights swept the yard, catching me mid-swing, hammer raised over the box. She stepped out, eyes wide, voice trembling. Ryan, what the hell are you doing? I lowered the hammer, smiling again. Just finishing what you started. Lauren stood frozen in the headlights, her silhouette sharp against the flickering fire pit. Ryan, stop this, she yelled, voice cracking. I dropped the hammer, letting it thud into the grass, and wiped my hands on my jeans. You want a break? I said, voice low. I'm clearing space for it. Her eyes darted to the smoldering pile, dresses, shoes, that box, then back to me. She didn't know I'd found the receipt, the letters, Chris. Not yet, she stammered. This is insane, but I just shrugged and turned back to the house. Inside, the air felt heavy, like her absence had already settled in. I grabbed a trash bag and started emptying her dresser, scarves, sweaters, a perfume bottle she'd spent a fortune on. Each item was a memory I trusted, now a lie I'd burn. But then I paused. Burning it all was too easy. She'd just move on, play victim. I needed her to feel this, to squirm. Therefore, I hauled the bag outside, dumped it onto the coals, and watched flames leap again. The perfume popped, glass shattering in the heat, filling the yard with a sickly sweet haze. She was still there, pacing by her car, phone pressed her ear, probably calling him. Chris, whining about her crazy husband. Good, let him hear. I dragged out more. Her yoga mat, a stack of journals she'd scribbled in late at night. The fire grew, shadows dancing across the lawn. But then I found something wedged in the closet, a leather pouch, heavy, unfamiliar. I unzipped it under the porch light. Cash, maybe $1,000, and a key with a tag reading Unit 17. A storage unit? My mind raced. What else was she hiding? I pocketed the key, the cash too, and tossed the pouch into the blaze. Lauren's car door slammed. She was leaving, tires spitting gravel. I didn't chase her. The fire roared, but my focus was on that key. Unit 17. Whatever she'd stashed there, it was mine to find now. Then my phone pinged, a text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. I stared at it, the flames reflecting in the screen. The text glowed on my phone. You're making a mistake. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I smirked, tossing it onto the counter. Chris, probably, too scared to show his face, too smug to stay quiet. I grabbed a beer, cracked it open, and leaned against the sink, the fire's glow still pulsing through the window. Lauren's car was long gone, but that key in my pocket felt like a live wire. Unit 17. She'd always been the planner, budgets, vacations, our whole life mapped out. But this was her secret map, and I'd stumbled onto it. I headed back to the workshop, needing to think. The table I'd been sanding sat there, half done, a quiet witness to my unraveling. I ran my fingers over its edge, grounding myself. She'd mocked this place, called it my man cave with a laugh. Now it was my war room. I pulled out the letters again, spreading them across the workbench. Dates stretched back 2 years, little notes about missing you soon. The watch was gone, melted in the fire, but the receipt nagged at me. Route 12, 2 months ago. She'd been meeting him while I was here, shaping Wood into something she'd never care about. But that key, Unit 17, changed everything. I grabbed my truck keys and drove, the night swallowing me whole. The storage place was a squat row of units off the highway, lit by buzzing floodlights. I found 17, rusted and unassuming, and slid the key in. The lock clicked open. Inside, boxes, a duffel bag, a folded tarp. I tore into the duffel. Clothes, men's boots, a cheap cologne bottle. Chris's stuff. My chest tightened. But then I opened a box. Photos of them, not recent, but old. High school old. Lauren in a cheer uniform. Him in a Letterman jacket. My head spun. This wasn't new. This was ancient. I sank onto a crate, staring at a picture of them laughing, arms tangled. She kept this, why? To remember? To plan? Then I heard it, gravel crunching outside, slow and deliberate. Someone was here. I shoved the photo in my pocket and stood, hand tightening around the chisel I'd brought. The door creaked open. The door swung wide, and there he was, Chris, leather jacket creaking, cigarette dangling from his lips. "You're a real piece of work, Ryan," he said, voice gravelly, like he'd rehearsed it. I gripped the chisel, not moving, letting him step into the dim light of Unit 17. He was taller than I remember from that picnic, broader too, but his smirk was the same, cocky, like he owned the place. "She told me you'd lost it," he went on, nodding at the scattered boxes. Guess she wasn't kidding. I didn't flinch. "You're the mistake," I said, echoing his text. His eyes narrowed. I'd driven back here after the fire, needing proof, but this? Him showing up? It was a gift. I stepped closer, chisel low, casual. "How long?" I asked. He laughed, flicking ash onto the concrete. "Long enough. She's done with you, man. Accept it." But then I held up the photo. High school Lauren, high school him. His face twitched, just for a second. "She kept mementos," I said. "You're not new. You're leftovers." He lunged, shoving me against a stack of boxes, but I twisted, slamming the chisel's handle into his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back. I didn't stop. I grabbed the duffel, flung it at him, boots and cologne spilling out. "Take your crap and go," I said, voice steady. He glared, clutching his side, but didn't swing again. "She'll never stay with you," he spat, backing toward the door. "She's begging me already." That hit harder than his push. Begging him? After everything? I let him leave, tires squealing into the night, but his words stuck. I locked the unit, keeping the key, and drove home, mind racing. The house was dark when I got back, fire pit cold. I sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. High school. They'd been together before me, before us. But then my phone buzzed, Lauren again. "We need to talk. I'm coming over now." My jaw clenched. She'd sent him to scare me, hadn't she? I stood, grabbed a fresh log for the fire, and lit it up. Let her come. She'd see what talking got her. The log caught fast, flames curling around it as I tossed more of Lauren's things into the pit. Her yoga books, a tacky lamp she'd insisted on. The backyard glowed orange, smoke thick with the scent of charred memories. I'd found Chris in her past, her present, and now she was coming back to talk. Fine. I give her a show. I dragged out a suitcase she'd left in the garage, unzipped it, and dumped her winter coats onto the blaze. Wool sizzled, shrinking into ash. She'd always hated my fires, called them messy. Now, they were her reckoning. But then I heard her car, engine cutting off sharp. Headlights swept the yard, catching me mid-toss with a framed photo of us. Our honeymoon, smiling like fools. She stormed out, barefoot, hair wild. "Ryan, stop," she screamed, voice raw. I paused, photo dangling over the flames. "You want to talk," I said, calm as stone. "Talk." She froze, eyes darting from the fire to me. "You're ruining everything," she whispered. I dropped the frame, glass shattered, curling black. "You ruined it first," I shot back. She lunged for the pit, trying to grab something, anything, but the heat drove her back. "I didn't mean for this," she said, tears streaking her face. Chris was a mistake. A mistake? After years of letters, photos, a storage unit? I laughed, sharp and cold. "You're a lousy liar." She sank to her knees, sobbing, but I wasn't done. I tossed in the journals I'd found, pages of her handwriting curling into smoke. But then she yelled, "What's that smell? Are you burning my letters?" My stomach dropped. She knew about them. I turned, hands black with ash, and saw her staring at the fire like it had betrayed her too. "You found them," she muttered, voice hollow. "You weren't supposed to." I stepped closer, towering over her. "Who's Chris, Lauren? High school boyfriend?" Plan B. She flinched but didn't answer. The fire popped, spitting embers between us. Then my phone buzzed. Tom, texting, saw that motorcycle guy circling the block. "Thought you should know." I glanced at her, still crumpled on the grass. Chris was close. Too close. And she wasn't moving. Lauren stayed there, knees in the dirt, as the fire roared behind us. I pocketed my phone, Chris circling the block meant trouble, but I'd deal with him later. Right now, she was the one I wanted answers from. Get up, I said, voice hard. She didn't. She just stared at the flames, tears drying on her cheeks. You don't understand, she mumbled. I was going to come back. I snorted, grabbing a scarf from the pile, silk, her favorite, and dangled it over the pit. This looked like coming back to you? Her eyes widened, and she scrambled up, reaching for it. I let it drop. It flared bright, then vanished. Ryan, please, she begged, voice breaking. I'll fix this. Just stop. Fix it. After a storage unit, old photos, a guy who just shoved me into a box. I stepped closer, ash crunching under my boots. You don't fix a lie this big, I said. You live with it, or you burn it down. She flinched, hands trembling, then blurted, it's Chris. I've always loved him. The words hit like a punch, but I didn't blink. Chris. High school Chris. The one she kept in her back pocket while I built her shelves and paid her bills. I turned, grabbed a chair leg from the fire's edge, still glowing, and pointed it at her. Always, I asked, voice steady. Then why me? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence was louder than the crackling flames. I tossed the leg back in, sparks flying. You're pathetic, I said, turning away. But then she grabbed my arm, nails digging in. I'm sorry, she sobbed. Take me back, please. I shook her off, staring at her like she was a stranger. Take her back? After this? Headlights flashed. Chris's motorcycle roared into the driveway, engine snarling. He cut it off, swung a leg over, and stormed toward us, face twisted. What did you do to her? He barked, seeing Lauren crumpled again. I smirked, hands black with soot, and stepped between them. She did this, I said, nodding at the fire. You're just a match. He froze, eyes flicking to her. Then she whispered, Chris, don't. Chris stopped dead, glaring at Lauren as she whispered, don't. The fire snapped behind me, casting jagged shadows across the yard. I stood there, hands gritty with ash, watching her shrink under his stare. You told him, he growled, voice low. She nodded, barely, eyes darting to me. He found the letters. Chris's jaw tightened, and I saw it, panic flickering behind his bravado. I met him once, at her company picnic 2 summers back. Loud, all grins, shaking my hand like we were buddies while his other arm rested on her shoulder. Now I knew why she'd laughed too hard at his dumb jokes. Always loved him, I said, turning to her. That's what you said. So what was I? The backup plan. She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. It wasn't like that, she mumbled. Chris left me back then. You were steady, like a dog she could leash. I laughed, sharp enough to cut. 10 years of steady, and you're crying to him now. Chris stepped closer, chest puffed. Watch your mouth, he warned. I didn't. I grabbed a charred photo frame from the pile. Us at a fair, her smiling, and tossed it into the fire. She gasped, but I held his gaze. She's all yours, I said. Take her. But then she lunged, grabbing my sleeve again. No, Ryan, I mean it. I want to stay. Her voice cracked, desperate, like she'd rehearsed it. Chris snorted, kicking the dirt. You're a mess, Lauren. Pick a lane. I shook her off, stepping back. This wasn't love. It was a game, and I'd been the pawn. High school sweethearts split apart, her settling for me until he circled back. Therefore, I saw it clear. She'd never chosen me. I'd just been there. The fire popped, spitting embers into the grass. Chris glared at her, then me, hands flexing like he wanted to fight. You're both pathetic, I said, voice cold. Enjoy the ashes. I turned toward the house, but then Lauren screamed, Wait. I paused, half expecting another lie. Instead, she pointed at the fire, voice trembling. There's something in there you need to see. My stomach dropped. What now? I spun back, eyes narrowing as Lauren pointed at the fire. What's in there? I demanded. She stammered, just look. The flames were dying down, but something glinted among the coals, a metal edge, half buried. I grabbed the rake, fished it out, and dropped it onto the grass. A singed file box, warped but intact, papers curling at the edges. I pried it open, ash stinging my hands. Inside, documents, bank statements, a lease, all in her name. And mine. My head snapped up. What is this? She bit her lip, silent. Chris shifted, uneasy, like he knew something I didn't. I skimmed the top page, a joint account I'd never seen, drained 2 weeks ago. The lease was for that apartment she'd run to, signed months back. "You've been planning this," I said, voice flat. "Siphoning money, setting up your exit." She shook her head, frantic. "It was for us. Emergencies." Emergencies? With my name forged on every line? I'd spent that morning Googling state law. Ohio's a no-fault divorce state. But fraud? That's a felony. "This is theft," I said, holding up the papers. "Legally, I could bury you." Her face paled. Chris stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're bluffing," he growled. I smirked, tossing the box aside. "Try me. I've got nothing left to lose." Lauren grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "He's serious," she whispered. "He'll do it." I watched them squirm, the fire's glow fading behind me. She thought I'd just sulk, let her waltz off with my life. But this was leverage. Therefore, I decided, let her beg now. "You've got one chance," I said. "Explain." "Now." She swallowed hard, voice shaking. "Chris needed cash. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back." "Borrowed? From me?" Without a word. Chris glared at her, then me like a cornered dog. "You're done," I said, stepping closer. "Both of you." But then he moved, fast, snatching the papers from my hand and bolting for his bike. Lauren screamed, "Chris, no." I lunged after him, but he was already swinging a leg over, engine roaring to life. The papers fluttered into the dirt as he peeled out, leaving her behind, and me with nothing but questions. I stood there, papers scattered in the gravel, as Chris's taillight vanished down the street. Lauren sank to her knees again, sobbing into her hands. "He wasn't supposed to take them," she choked out. I didn't care. The fire hissed behind us, embers fading, but my blood was boiling. She drained our account, faked my signature, and now her boyfriend was riding off with the evidence. I grabbed the rake, stabbed it into the dirt, and turned to her. "You're done," I said, voice like steel. "Get out of my yard." She looked up, mascara streaking her face. "Ryan, please. I'll fix it. I'll get it back." "Fix it? With what? Her lies?" I laughed, bitter, and grabbed a piece of cedar from the woodpile, a chunk I'd been saving for a new project. Chris wanted to fight? He'd get one. I swung it hard, cracking it against the fire pit's edge. Splinters flew, and Lauren flinched. "You don't fix this," I said. "You live with it." But then I heard the rumble, his bike, circling back. Headlights cut through the dark, and he screeched to a stop, papers stuffed in his jacket. "Thought you'd scare me off?" he yelled, storming toward me. I didn't hesitate. I swung the cedar again, catching his knee with a dull thud. He howled, dropping to one leg, but grabbed my shirt, pulling me down. We hit the grass hard, fists flying. Lauren screamed, "Stop it," but I didn't. I landed a punch to his jaw, tasting blood. Mine or his, I couldn't tell. He shoved me off, scrambling up, limping. "You're crazy," he spat, backing toward his bike. I stood, chest heaving, cedar still in hand. "Take her and go," I said, nodding at Lauren. She was crying, begging now. "Ryan, no, I'll stay. I swear." I ignored her, staring Chris down as he hesitated, then grabbed her arm. "Let's go," he muttered, dragging her to the bike. She fought him, clawing, but he shoved her on behind him. The engine roared and they were gone. I sank onto the porch steps, alone with the dying fire. Then I saw it. A singed photo, half-burned, poking out of the ashes. I stumbled to the fire pit, snatching the photo from the coals. It was Lauren and Chris, younger, her in a sundress, him with a mullet, arms around each other. The edges were charred, but the date on the back survived. June 2005. Before me. Before us. I sank onto the grass, staring at it, the pieces clicking together. She hadn't just cheated, she'd never stopped loving him. I'd been the rebound, the safe bet after he'd dumped her. 10 years of my life, building a home, a marriage, and it was all a placeholder. The fire was dead now, just smoke curling into the night, but something in me shifted. I wasn't the guy who'd smiled at her announcement anymore. That Ryan was gone, burned up with her things. I stood, brushing ash off my jeans, and walked to the workshop. The table I'd been sanding sat there, rough but solid. I ran my hand over it, feeling the grain. She'd mocked it, But it was mine, something I'd made, something real. I grabbed a chisel, started carving my initials into the corner. RT. This wasn't her house anymore. It was my ground to reclaim. But then I thought about those papers, Chris riding off with proof of her fraud. I could chase it, call the cops, drag them both through court. Maybe I would. Ohio law was on my side. Forgery, theft, I had a case. Yet standing there, tools in hand, I felt lighter. She'd begged to stay, and I'd said no. That was power she'd never take back. Therefore, I decided let them run. They'd choke on their own mess eventually. I tossed the photo into a drawer, locked the workshop, and headed inside. The house was quiet, emptier than ever, but it didn't feel like a loss. I grabbed a beer, sat on the couch, and let the silence settle. I wasn't Steady Ryan anymore. I was the guy who'd burned his old life down and walked away. Then my phone buzzed time again. Heard the bike leave. You okay? I smirked, typing back, better than ever. But as I hit send, I noticed something glinting under the couch. Another key, small and silver. I bent down, fishing the key from under the couch. It was tiny, no tag, just a faint B12 etched into the metal. My pulse quickened. Another secret? I'd thought Unit 17 was her last hideout, but this, B12, felt different. I grabbed my jacket, the singed photo still in my mind. Lauren and Chris, 2005. High school lovers who'd circled back, using me as a stepping stone. I let them ride off, thinking I'd won by walking away. But this key? It was a loose thread, and I couldn't leave it dangling. I drove to the only place that made sense, a bank downtown where we'd opened our first account. The lobby was closed, but the safe deposit boxes were 24/7 with a key. I slipped into the after-hours entrance, heart pounding, and found B12. The box slid out, cold and heavy. Inside, a stack of letters, different from the ones in Unit 17, plus a velvet pouch and a notebook. I opened the pouch first. A ring, simple, gold, not the one I'd given her. The notebook was worse, dates, amounts, plans. Leave Ryan, June 25, it read. March now, 3 months early. She'd been counting down. The letters were from Chris, but older, 2004, 2005. I'll come back for you, one promised. She'd kept them, not as memories, but as a vow. The ring? An engagement band he'd given her before dumping her. She'd married me, wearing his ghost. I sat there, box open, the weight of it sinking in. I wasn't just the backup. I was the delay. Therefore, I understood her break wasn't a whim. It was her rewriting history, picking up where they'd left off. I took the ring, the notebook, and locked the rest back up. Outside, dawn was breaking, gray and quiet. I drove home, loaded that half-finished table into my truck, and left the house behind. They could have each other, fraud, lies, and all. I'd build something new, somewhere else. The fire had cleared the way. Pulling onto the highway, I tossed the ring out the window, watching it vanish in the rearview. She'd never rewrite me again. Thank you for tuning into this story. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you're watching from right now. Let us know in the comments.